Today's news had two speeds: spectacle and stress. At Madison Square Garden, the NBA Finals looked less like a basketball game and more like a national stage. Celebrities courtside, presidential politics in the building, security tightened outside, and Victor Wembanyama doing what franchise players do, changing the emotional temperature of a series. At the same time, the business world was sending its own signal. Artificial intelligence is no longer just a chip story, or a software story, or a futuristic story. It is now a fiber optic cable story, a power grid story, a manufacturing job story, and increasingly, a national security story. And across courts, borders, fault lines at stadium gates, the same theme kept repeating. Institutions are under pressure, and the cost of risk is being repriced in real time. This is your Top Stories Wrap-Up for Tuesday, June 9th, 2026. I'm your host, and today we're connecting the dots across sports, markets, politics, technology, public safety, and global tension. Let's start at the Garden. The San Antonio Spurs beat the New York Knicks 115-111 in Game 3 of the NBA Finals on Monday night, cutting New York's series lead to 2-1. Victor Wembanyama scored 32 points, and the win ended any talk of a Knicks sweep. That alone would have been enough drama. This was the first NBA Finals game at Madison Square Garden since 1999. For Knicks fans, it was not just a game, it was a civic event, the kind of night New York had been waiting decades to host again. But the basketball shared the spotlight with politics. President Donald Trump attended the game, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to appear at an NBA Finals game. When he was shown on the arena video board during the national anthem, the crowd reaction was loud and overwhelmingly negative. The president's presence also changed the logistics of the night. Security tightened around Madison Square Garden. Streets were restricted. Some nearby fan activity was canceled, moved, or redirected. Fans were urged to arrive early, and many people who had hoped to be close to the building found themselves watching from bars, screens, and watch parties away from the arena. So what was this, really? On the surface, it was Game 3 of the Finals. But underneath, it was a reminder that major sporting events are now where culture, politics, security, and money all collide. The Garden became a basketball arena, a political theater, a celebrity corridor, and a security perimeter, all at once. And yet, the thing that may matter most for the series is simpler. Wembanyama looked like the player San Antonio needed him to be. The Knicks still lead the series, but the emotional momentum has shifted. A 2-1 series is very different from a 3-0 series. One is control. Now shift from Madison Square Garden to the infrastructure behind the AI economy. OpenAI has confidentially filed for an initial public offering. If that process moves forward, it could become one of the most closely watched listings of the decade. The key word here is confidentially. This does not mean an IPO is guaranteed tomorrow. It means the company has positioned itself to move toward public markets if conditions, strategy, and regulatory review align. That matters because OpenAI is not just another fast-growing technology company. It sits at the center of the AI investment cycle, the productivity debate, the labor market debate, and the question of how much capital the next generation of computing will require. At almost the same time, Sam Altman's separate identity verification venture, Tools for Humanity, is reportedly cutting jobs while continuing to work on World, the iris scanning project built around its Orb devices. Taken together, those two stories show the two sides of the AI boom. On one side, huge companies are preparing for the possibility of enormous public market valuations. On the other side, even ambitious AI-adjacent ventures are facing the discipline of costs, adoption curves, and investor patience. And the AI build-out is increasingly visible outside Silicon Valley. Amazon signed a multi-billion-dollar agreement with Corning to supply optical fiber, cable, and connectivity equipment for U.S. data centers. The deal is expected to create about 1,000 manufacturing jobs in North Carolina. That is important because it shows how the AI trade is moving from hype into heavy industry. The story is no longer only about which company designs the most advanced chip. It is also about who makes the fiber that connects the racks, who supplies the electricity, who builds the data centers, who cools them, who finances them, and who gets the permits. For investors, that means the AI supply chain is widening. Semiconductor designers still matter, of course, but so do glassmakers, networking suppliers, utilities, construction firms, power equipment manufacturers, and industrial landlords. This is the interpretation. The market is beginning to treat AI like a physical infrastructure cycle, not just a software cycle. That does not mean every company touching AI is automatically a winner. In fact, that is one of the day's quieter lessons. US stocks rebounded after a sharp sell-off in chip names, with the major indexes moving higher. But the rebound does not erase the warning from the previous rout. Investors are still willing to buy the AI story, but they are less willing to ignore valuation risk. In plain English, the AI trade is alive, but it is no longer automatic. The companies that can show revenue, margins, pricing power, and durable demand may still be rewarded. The companies that are merely adjacent to the theme may face a tougher test. Washington added another layer of complexity. The Pentagon added Alibaba, BYD, Baidu, and other Chinese firms to its list of companies it says are linked to China's military. The designation bars them from U.S. defense contracts and expands scrutiny well beyond traditional defense suppliers. This is not just about tanks, missiles, or military hardware. It's about cloud computing, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, robotics, batteries, networks, and data. Government is signaling that the boundary between commercial technology and strategic technology is getting thinner. For markets, this creates a new kind of discount. A company can have strong earnings, a global customer base, and technological scale, and still face geopolitical pressure if Washington sees it as part of a national security risk map. That is the fact pattern. The interpretation is that the US-China technology rivalry is moving deeper into the corporate economy. And the forward-looking risk is that more companies could find themselves caught between commercial opportunity and security designation. A federal judge in Boston struck down President Trump's $100,000 fee on new H-1B visa petitions. The court ruled that the administration exceeded its authority and violated administrative law requirements. This is a major decision for employers, universities, hospitals, technology firms, and foreign workers who rely on the skilled worker visa system. The fee would have dramatically raised the cost of bringing in certain foreign professionals, and it had already triggered legal challenges and uncertainty. But this may not be the final word. The administration could appeal, and immigration policy remains one of the most contested areas of executive power. The larger story is that courts are again testing the boundary between presidential authority and statutory limits. The H-1B ruling sits alongside broader disputes over denaturalization efforts, control over White House spaces, and the scope of executive discretion. For businesses, the lesson is practical. Regulatory risk is not abstract. It can affect hiring, compliance, labor costs, and long-term planning. For workers, the stakes are even more personal: status, mobility, family plans, and career security. Now to the physical risks of the day. In the southern Philippines, rescuers searched damaged buildings after a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck off Mindanao on Monday. Officials reported at least 37 deaths, nearly 500 injuries, and more than 32,000 people displaced. Tsunami waves reached as high as 1.4 meters in parts of the Philippines. This is a humanitarian story first. Families are displaced, emergency shelters are filling, and aftershocks remain a concern. It is also a reminder that disaster risk is a public finance issue and an infrastructure issue. Roads, hospitals, ports, power systems, and housing stock all become part of the recovery equation. In regions exposed to seismic and tsunami risk, resilience is not a slogan, it is a budget line. A separate magnitude 6.1 earthquake near western Cuba shook parts of Cuba and Florida. That quake appears to have been less destructive, but it added to a day in which natural hazards were impossible to ignore. In East Asia, Chinese President Xi Jinping made his first trip to North Korea in 7 years, meeting Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. The visit was full of symbolism: military honors, public displays of friendship, and a clear message that Beijing wants to remain central to North Korea's strategic orbit. That matters because North Korea has been leaning more heavily toward Moscow. China does not want to be sidelined in a region where missiles, sanctions, nuclear policy, and great power competition all intersect. In the Middle East, Israel and Iran appeared to pause after a brief exchange of fire. The immediate crisis may not have escalated, but the underlying tensions remain. But the episode showed how fragile the current ceasefire framework remains. President Trump's public insistence that he called all the shots added another layer to an already complicated U.S.-Israel relationship, especially as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to act according to Israel's own security calculations. Here, the fact is the pause. The interpretation is that the underlying risk has not disappeared. Now to the World Cup, where optimism is running into logistics and politics before the first whistle. The 2026 World Cup is supposed to be the biggest, most expansive version of the tournament yet, staged across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But, days before kickoff, the off-field story is complicated. Iran's Soccer Federation says FIFA revoked its ticket allocation for Iranian supporters at the team's US-based matches. That claim immediately sharpened diplomatic tensions around a tournament partly hosted by a country in conflict with Tehran. At the same time, ticket demand and resale availability have become reputational issues. A tournament built around scale cannot afford the image of empty seats, confused access, or fans priced out of the experience. New York City is planning a massive Central Park watch party for the World Cup final on July 19th. That captures the version of the tournament officials want to project: joyful, global, civic, and communal. But fans are dealing with the harder version: high prices, uncertain access, visa friction, and uneven distribution. The World Cup is still likely to be enormous. The question is whether the organizers can turn scale into energy rather than friction. Now to public safety and health. The USDA confirmed additional New World screwworm cases in the United States, including detections in Texas. New World screwworm larvae infest living tissue in warm-blooded animals. They are a threat to livestock, pets, wildlife, and rarely, people. For ranchers, this comes at a difficult time. Cattle supplies are already tight, and drought stress has pressured producers in many regions. Even if the immediate case count remains limited, containment measures, inspections, and uncertainty can affect operations and costs. That does not mean beef prices automatically surge from this alone. But it does add another risk factor to a food system already dealing with weather, disease, labor, and transportation costs. Stellantis is also recalling roughly 1.08 million Jeep Wrangler and Gladiator vehicles in the United States from model years 2021 through 2025. The issue involves wiring tied to the electric hydraulic power steering pump, which may overheat and create a fire hazard. Owners are being urged to follow recall guidance and park affected vehicles away from structures until a remedy is available. This is one of those stories where the advice is straightforward. If you own one of the affected vehicles, check the official recall notice and follow the manufacturer's instructions. Do not rely on rumor, and do not wait if your vehicle is included. In health, Eli Lilly presented late-stage data on retatrutide, an investigational medicine that targets GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptors. The reported weight loss and metabolic results are significant enough to keep investor and medical attention focused on the next generation of obesity and diabetes treatments. But here's the important caution. Trial results are not the same thing as broad real-world use. Regulatory review, peer-reviewed publication, safety monitoring, and access decisions will determine how important the drug ultimately becomes. The weight loss drug market is one of the most important pharmaceutical stories of this decade. It affects healthcare costs, insurers, employers, food companies, consumer behavior, and drug maker valuations. But it is still a medical story before it is a market story. Now to media and politics. The fallout from President Trump's Meet the Press appearance continued after a contentious interview in which he defended his record, clashed over election claims, and cut the exchange short. Fact-checkers rejected his unsupported claims about 2020 election fraud and current election insecurity. The broader point is that election legitimacy remains one of the central fault lines in American politics. The argument is not just about one interview. It is about whether institutions, voters, and media organizations can agree on a common set of facts heading into future elections. CBS News is facing its own internal turbulence, with Scott Pelley criticizing leadership changes at 60 Minutes and calling for the removal of editor-in-chief Bari Weiss. That dispute reflects a larger tension inside legacy media: how to maintain investigative credibility while owners, editors, journalists, and audiences fight over ideology, tone, and trust. In Los Angeles, Spencer Pratt failed to advance to the mayoral runoff. Incumbent Karen Bass is set to face City Council member Nithya Raman. That moves the race away from celebrity novelty and back toward the city's most difficult issues: homelessness, affordability, public safety, and basic governance. And the country also lost a major historian. Gordon S. Wood, the Pulitzer Prize-winning scholar of the American Revolution, died at 92 after being struck by a vehicle in East Providence, Rhode Island. His work argued that the revolution was not only a break from Britain, but a deep transformation in American society and politics. So where does all of this leave us? In the next 24 to 48 hours, several pressure points are worth watching. First, the Philippines. Casualty numbers, aftershocks, shelter capacity, and infrastructure damage will determine whether this remains a severe disaster or becomes a longer recovery crisis. Second, the H-1B ruling. Watch for appeals or emergency motions. If the legal fight continues, employers and workers may remain in limbo. Third, the China technology designations. Investors will want to know whether the Pentagon's list triggers broader sanctions pressure, delisting debates, procurement restrictions, or corporate distancing. Fourth, the World Cup. FIFA, Iran's federation, and U.S. authorities will face pressure to clarify ticket access, visas, and fan logistics before the tournament's credibility takes a hit. Fifth, the NBA Finals. The Knicks still lead, but San Antonio has changed the feel of the series. If Wembanyama follows Game 3 with another dominant performance, the story could swing quickly from Knicks' destiny to Spurs' resurgence. The bottom line is this: today's news was not a collection of random disruptions, it was a map of stress points. Sports are political, technology is industrial, markets are geopolitical, courts are policy battlegrounds, natural disasters are infrastructure tests, and global events, even those built around unity, are still shaped by borders, visas, and power. Big themes still matter. AI, infrastructure, healthcare, defense, energy, global sports. But the winners will be determined by execution, regulation, and resilience, not just narrative. For everyone else, the takeaway is simpler. The institutions we rely on are being tested in public, in real time. Some will bend, some will adapt, some will surprise us. And tomorrow, we'll see which pressures turn into passing headlines, and which ones become the next big story.